Thank you very much, Jan-Olaf. Pleasure being here. And I'm a little bit torn because I had the pleasure to talk to some of the panelists, and you have a great panel ahead of you. So I'd like to keep my speech to the point here. As Jan-Olaf said, I work for WHEB Partners, which is one part of the WHEB Group. The WHEB Group is around since '95. It covers 4 lines of investments, all with a sustainability angle. One is early stage venture, clean tech. Second one is infrastructure, so wind parks, solar parks. The other one is asset management, so publicly listed companies. And I work with the private equity side, so more mature companies. We have a lot of family-owned businesses, so our companies in the portfolio typically have between 50 and 500 employees, and I work for that side of the business. I'd like to report to you from the front line some of the lessons we learned. How is this theme being accepted by institutional investors? Because what a lot of people forget, in the end of the day, a fund like us is a service provider. We are providing capital to companies who are in need of capital, but we also have to raise the funds on our own. So we're in the market raising capital as well, and we need both interesting companies to invest in. We have to perform in order to attract capital from our investors. So on the private equity side, we currently manage 260 million euros. This is not a lot of money for private equity investors when you take into account the size of the companies we're investing in. We manage 2 funds. We started doing this on the private equity side in 2008. We had 12 companies in the previous fund. We've sold 4, and in the new fund that we started 2012, we have 5 investments already. Our investors are quite different from the colleagues on the early stage clean tech investing side. Early stage clean tech investing, they manage 2 rather small funds. Mainly the capital comes from high net worth individuals that want to make an impact, and they're interested in very cool technology companies. Our investors are much more conservative. We have banks, we have pension funds. The largest investor is the European Investment Fund. I noticed on the list there's one participant from the European Investment Fund. Thank you very much for being a rock-solid investor across 2 funds already. We invest in 5 sectors: software and data services, electronics, advanced materials and chemicals, industrial processes, and mechanical engineering. As I said, we invest in mature companies. We're looking for companies with very strong ESG credentials. The 3 letters stand for E is environmental, S and G is social and governance. So when we make investments, we screen very carefully, besides the financial parameters, how the companies are performing. In these 3 categories, we have minimum requirements, but what we also do is we're trying to ensure ongoing monitoring and improvement in those categories. The social and governance part is rather easy because we have to do this, or a lot of this we have to do anyways, because we're regulated by the British FCA, so things like anti-bribery, money laundering, we have to ensure that things like that are being taken into account in our companies. Anyways, we're a long-time UNPRI signatory. We're involved there in various task forces. The main issue in our industry is how do you report, how do you measure data? Everybody wants to have the data to collect this data and arrive at useful conclusions. The problem is everybody is measuring it differently, and it's very difficult to arrive at a common standard. So this is where we're spending a lot of time ensuring that the stakeholders in this industry can agree on certain ways the way they monitor, in particular, the environmental performance of these companies. In the investment world, I think it's very important to distinguish a couple of differences. It's always a boring topic, but I'm afraid I have to talk a little bit about definitions so we're all on the same page. People talk about impact investing. When people refer to impact investing, it's typically clearly understood that the number one focus of these investments is making an environmental and social impact. And there comes a big gap, and then there is the financial performance. So typical examples are micro-lending social projects where people are willing to compromise on their financial returns because the environmental and social impact comes number one. This is not the case for us. For us, financial performance is clearly number one. What we strongly believe that the two are linked, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Then there is clean tech, which mainly refers to the very, very early stage investment in companies that provide an environmental impact. I'll later talk about some of the investments we make, we do, and those are not considered clean tech because these companies are very mature already. Then what we find a lot of people are confusing with companies with an environmental impact with renewables. There's a lot of different ways how you can make a positive impact to the environment without being a company that's in the wind, solar, or biomass space. So one has to distinguish there. What we see at the front line is that more and more people care about these things. When we started to our portfolio companies, to some degree, this was a pain. They wanted our capital, they wanted our expertise, and here we are, besides doing the usual due diligence, also doing environmental screening. We want to know what policies they have in place. And in the early days, I remember it was a pain. Why do we have to do this? This is an extra burden. What's the whole point? This has evolved to people really seeing the sense in it. When you apply common sense, you can guess that there is a connection between your environmental impact, social impact, and your financial performance. If you run a dirty business, what is the probability that this is going to be a growing business? I think it's rather low. This is what common sense tells to you. If you run a dirty business, the likelihood is high that you have to make use of resources, and using resources means cost. It is also expensive. Running a dirty business also more and more means bad marketing. We see this again and again and again. I think the first amazing case there where people realized that bad environmental performance can bring a bad financial impact with you was the Exxon Valdez disaster in '89. So Exxon spent more than $2 billion in the cleanup. The legal settlements were $1.5 billion. The shares lost 4% in a day. And this is only one case. You know of scandals in food, you know of scandals in textiles, where immediately through a bad, what we call ESG performance, you see a financial impact. And we like to see that. It's becoming more and more mainstream. We are unfortunately not at a stage yet where there is hard facts showing that strong ESG performance on the private equity side correlates into strong financial returns. There is, however, clear evidence on the publicly listed sides. Our colleagues from the asset management side, they can drown us in data where people indeed have shown that, where listed companies that really care about these things and put measures in place outperform their peers. But on the private equity side, Unfortunately, despite all these efforts, people were not able to prove that. What we see, however, is that a lot of data is building up. We see this on our end. We're getting questionnaires and report requests from our investors, and I remember sort of in the early years, 2008, 2009, this was 2-3 reports per year that I had to fill in for our investors. It's now 15 to 20 per year. What's also nice to see is that there is more and more overlap of what people are collecting. About a month ago or so, when I was preparing for this speech, I reached out to my investors and I said, what sort of data can you share with me? You're collecting this info not only from us, but also from a lot of other funds. Can you show that there is a positive correlation between financial performance and environmental performance? And unfortunately, we are not there yet. There is evidence, but we can't show it specifically. Giving you a specific example of how do we measure environmental performance in our portfolio, we look at the reduced emissions, so carbon footprint. We look at land, reduced landfill, reduced soil contamination, energy. Have they contributed to less use of energy, air? What is the contribution to reducing combustion gases and preserving of natural resources? When we do this, we always look at what is the alternative, what are the peers doing. Give you an example, one of our portfolio companies scored extremely high in regards to landfill avoidance. So what is this company doing? Is a software and technology company that's providing solutions to the waste industry, where the waste industry municipalities can move from a pay-by-container business model to a pay-by-weight business model. So like your mobile phone bill, at the end of the month, you're getting a detailed list of how much waste by weight was collected when. And we were able to show that indeed this impacts user behavior. If you have sort of a fixed fee, and it doesn't matter whether the bin is half full or empty, people care about that. For the company, actually, it was an interesting business proposition. Company was rather successful. We invested when they were active, I think, in 3 countries, doing around 20 million of revenue. They were profitable back then, and we sold it last year at a very nice profit. Give you another example. Company that scored extremely high in carbon avoidance, also scored extremely high in avoidance of natural resources. When you look at the amounts that they saved just per year, close than to 200,000 barrels of oil, you would think they are in energy generation. So is this potentially a solar company? No, it's not. It's actually a company that is using recycled plastic and turns them into very light honeycomb structure plastic boards that are being used in the logistics industry. So